I'm glad to see everybody here, and I am going to let Katie do the chat. So this is usually a 90-minute presentation, so I've condensed it, but please feel free to put some questions in the chat when you have them, because we want to make this, especially with a small group, as interactive as possible. And so, you know, working with the school to create a plan that will help a child learn the skills they need throughout their life at times can feel overwhelming. Today, we're going to look at the overall IEP process and strategies for using person-centered planning in order to help that child reach their good life. And I don't have to introduce myself. I will say that this is a picture of my family. And Sean is the Chiefs fan. Not everybody's the Chiefs fan, but Sean's the grinning Chiefs guy up there. My husband is retired from active duty military. My oldest son, JP, had a learning disability in elementary school and then tested into gifted by middle. And the young lady with him, this is the first time I can announce this at a presentation. I'm going to be a grandma soon. So I'm super excited about that. So if you will go to Menti real quick, let's see, is it going to pop up? And just tell me who's here, parents, professionals. There we go. This kind of helps with the tailoring some of the questions and gives us an idea of who is in the audience. When my son Sean was 2, we were told to prepare to put him in an institution. He would never talk, never have eye contact, and never be a functioning member of our family. And so we have navigated these systems with Sean and worked very hard to ensure that he was a part of his school community and his community in general. So I'm going to keep moving so that we can, and if you go ahead and fill that out if you haven't. All right, we're looking. And thank you for the professionals that are here, because it's important that you have this information as well. We have a Padlet where all the resources are housed for this presentation. And if you go to that Padlet, then you can, I'm gonna see if I can copy the link into the chat for you. You can scroll down in each column, as well as you can scroll across the bottom. So there's a dearth of information there that you can gain. All right, and we'll get the link put in the chat here a little bit later. So Families Together, we are the parent training, the federally designated parent training and family-to-family health information center. We help Kansas families that include a child with a disability or special health care need. And those families who are still searching for answers to determine if my child might have a disability. And we define disability as anything from mental health to autism to cancer to cerebral palsy to any ADHD, any disability, anything that affects that young person's ability to navigate in their environment in the same way as their peers. We serve families whose kids are birth through 26. Any disability, any special health care need. I will say our niche is birth to 21, that school age piece. But because we have a few staff, including myself, who've navigated those adult services, we can also do some information and referral for families whose kids are out of school. The goal of Families Together is to encourage, educate, and empower. I connected with Families Together when my son was 2, and I tried all of these different agencies, and they said, wrong number, you make too much money, wrong county, he's too old, he's too young. Families Together was that first phone call I had where somebody actually talked about my son in a positive light and helped me see that we weren't an autistic family. We were a family that had some quirky needs and had to navigate some disability services around autism, but we were a family with some pretty great strengths too. So we provide individualized assistance at no cost, and there's no waiting list. Families can pick up the phone. We don't take referrals. Families pick up the phone or send us an email or contact us through the website. And what we're going to do is have a conversation with that family about what their needs are, and talk to them about their child's strengths and help them navigate that educational services or the special healthcare needs services as well, and community resources. We are statewide, and we're proud that we now have remote staff throughout the state. So we are pretty excited to be able to serve the state. Families can pick up that phone, call us, and we're going to assist them. So I'm not going to go through these learning objectives. These are things that I'm hoping you're going to be able to glean from this presentation and be able to help families navigate. And if you are a family, help you understand and how to navigate the IEP process, that special education process. The first and foremost thing that we must remember is that all students are general education students. The Kansas CAN vision says to prepare Kansas students for lifelong success through rigorous quality academic instruction, career training, and character development according to each student's gifts and talents. And if you look at that, it says Kansas students. It also mentions academic, career, character, and character development. And so when we're looking at our youth, our children, students, we're thinking about these kids as a general education student first. They have the right to access and progress in the general education curriculum. They may need additional supports, but they still have that right to access and progress in the general education curriculum to the best of their ability. So when we say all kids are general education students, I wanted to briefly, the multi-tiered systems of supports is a framework that is used throughout the state to provide general education interventions. You think about the bottom of that triangle, that's all kids. The middle part of that triangle, that's what we do for all kids at the bottom. The middle part of the triangle means that we're going to provide some supplemental services, extra instruction, group, small group. It's not more of the same as tier 1. And along the way, you're collecting data to show, is this strategy working? And then tier 3 is for those students who need intense support in order to succeed. Extra instruction, support for these youth are provided, usually in a 1-to-1. Tier 3 is not special education. A student who's receiving special education services can be any one of these tiers. And we may have a student who's receiving tier 3 behavioral support and tier 1 academic support, and have an IEP for behaviors, or they fluctuate throughout. But there are supports available to students who do not have an IEP or a Section 504 plan. So what is an IEP? It's an individualized education program. It's a commitment of services and supports the child will receive. It will outline exactly what the child's going to learn, the timelines, how they're going to learn the skills, and where the delivery of those services and supports is going to take place. It also is going to make sure that we know exactly who's responsible for helping the student and other supports and services needed to help the student. So if you look at this idea, just as a reminder, under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, to be eligible for an IEP, you must be between the ages of 3 and 21, have a disability as defined by IDEA. So there's 13 different categories, and you have to have a need for special education services. So that IEP is providing individualized instruction for that student. That education is, what is that specially designed instruction or related services this student needs to be able to access and progress in the general education curriculum. And then the program, it is the services that you are going to provide that is going to be provided to that student. It serves as a communication vehicle. It is a legal document. It is a management tool, so it helps the parents and the school know what services, when, where, how, and what the youth is, our child is making progress. It's also a compliance document. If we have to follow the IEP in order to be able to, because it's a legal document, and it's a commitment of time and services. And it also helps parents and schools communicate effectively about the services. So everything in an IEP is individualized. The curriculum is, KSDE sends down the core curriculum or the standards and says, this is what we're teaching. The district determines the curriculum, and then the way in which each student is accessing that curriculum is, with those students who have IEPs, is determined by an IEP team. Everything on this slide, from the curriculum, the accommodations, modifications, adaptation, where, when, the types of instruction and assessments, those are all negotiable. That is all individualized to that student's needs. So we have it's important to know that this is a team, and each team member brings different perspectives of the student's strengths and needs. IDEA specifically requires, the legal requirements are the parent or education decision maker, legal education decision maker, not less than one of the student's general education teachers if the student is or may be participating in the general education environment. Not less than one of the student's special education teachers or special education providers, and then someone who understands how the evaluation results affect the student's access to the general education curriculum. And then they have to have somebody who is the local education agency representative, LEA. This person is qualified to provide and supervise specially designed instruction, knows about the curriculum, and knows and understands the school district's resources. So the general ed teacher of the child, the special ed teacher of the child, the parent, someone to interpret evaluation results that have been done by the school, and the LEA representative are required. You also will have related service providers for those students who are receiving related services like PE, adaptive PE, adaptive music, physical therapy, all of those different service providers. If they are providing services for that student, and that is going to be discussed during the meeting, they need to be there. The transition services, if you have a student who is 14 or over and receiving transition services, or should be receiving transition services, the agency representative can also be included in that IEP meeting. And then others with special knowledge. We have families who are inviting their therapist, their child's therapist to the meeting, their neighbors. Sean's brother went to his meetings. It's people who know and care about that young person and can help guide the planning to ensure. JP wanted to make sure when he went to his brother's meeting that he wanted him to be learning what other kids his age were doing. And he, being 15 months apart, had a pretty good insight on what his brother needed to be doing. So the first step in this process is determining who the student is. What are that student's unique strengths, talents, and interests? And it's very challenging for families because we live in a medical model. Everybody is asking about my child's disability, what they can't do, what they did wrong. We have to help families and educators and everybody focus on those strengths, interests, and passions, and those talents as well. So those, especially your kids who need a little bit more motivation due to behaviors or just struggling, Using those strengths, interests, and talents are the ways that you're going to get them to engage. Then you have to identify what the needs are and, where is the student right now? And what is the student want to do in the future? So we use the life course framework for person-centered planning, and I'm just going to share a few tools with you. This is one, and these are on that Padlet, the link that I will put in the chat. These are on there, and they're great tools to sit down with families, and anybody can do it. You can use it with any age. Just sit down with families and talk to them about, and the young person, please don't forget the student. Ask the student what people like and admire about them. And so helping fill this out so that when you come to the IEP meetings, you have more information about what that student can do, what that student enjoys doing, and what that student is really passionate about. So in the chat, you guys put a few of strengths of students you know. All right, I'm going to keep moving. We got a couple here. Creative, dedicated. Those are great strengths, and those are great things that could be used to help with their education as their team understands that. We've got a lot of creative kiddos out there who, if we can use that creativity to bolster their academics and their social emotional skills, it's going to be outstanding. The other section of this is pieces and parts that, what is most important to my family member? What is most important to me as an individual if you're doing this with a student? And what are the best strategies? People need to know that if you go to Sean and you say, shh, then he shuts down. We have some behavioral challenges. And so that causes trauma. So we know that instead you say, turn the volume down or turn the volume up. And so making sure that we know what some of those strategies are working for the family at home or in the community. So IDEA says that students are going to have involvement and progress in the general education curriculum and addressing their unique needs that arise from that disability. If you see this picture there, that is my oldest son who struggled with speech and anxiety and had a reading disability. And they had to do a project about an explorer, and he was not doing a picture of the explorer, and he didn't want to get up in front of the group. So I asked him about his explorer, and he said, Mom, he's dead. So he made a grave, and he used a wood burner and put his notes on it. Now, nobody's looking at him when he's up there. They're looking at the cake, hoping they're going to get the cake. And so he accessed the general education curriculum in a little bit different way so that he could actually present in front of his peers. So looking at the student overall, general education curriculum means everything every other student is doing in that building, not just reading, writing, and math. It means walking down the hall. It means recess. It means lunchtime. It means socialization. All of these things are vital for a student to be successful. So looking at all of these different areas, their health needs, is that impacting the school day? Are there behavioral challenges? Their communication style. And we talk about communication, we have to look at speech. Can we understand them? And then the social use of language. So looking at them overall. And then it's important to know what peers are doing. What are peers learning? What's the grade level curriculum? And then what projects or events or activities or clubs? The bottom picture is Sean in 5th grade. They did a science project, and there was question about whether Sean would do the project, and I asked that Sean be paired with a peer who had limited parental support. Not a bad parent. It was a single dad raising 3 kids. And so Sean and Jonathan were paired together, they did a science project on who has the most pepperoni on their pizza. Sean and Jonathan got to go out to eat twice. They got to take pizza for snacks for their peers. Jonathan got his science project done. Sean got the social and communication skills he needed, as well as getting the science project done, because in reality, it's parents doing the science project a large part. And if the parent can't be involved, the teachers are having to provide extra support. So thinking outside the box as to how we can address some of the needs of students. Our biggest goal for that project for Sean was the social opportunity. And he became the kid to know because he brought pizza to school. So it also means this college and career readiness wheel. All of these skills are skills that a student needs in order to be successful, a successful employed 26-year-old. These are the skills that KSDE says our students need. And they use this college and career. So if you look at it and you hover over, it's going to define what it is, and then it's going to give you some resources. And so sometimes we hear schools, especially when kids are out of elementary school, say we don't work on self-care. We don't work on certain skills. They need that skill to be successful in adulthood, and they're working with other students in other ways. So when we're talking about that youth and we're talking about their strengths, preference, interests, needs, that's what's called the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. And so the reason I harp on strengths is they did a wax museum project, and Sean loves Wheel of Fortune. So for the wax museum project, Sean was Pat Sajak. He was able to engage and be a part of everything his peers were doing and identifying those needs. Every need, preference, strength, all needs to be observable and measurable. Everything written in that IEP so that everybody understands what that strength is, what environment that is in, what that need is, what environment that need is occurring in, or how much support that student needs. So that's the first step. To me, that's the foundation, the most important piece. And that is a piece where parent involvement is vital, is to share who your child is and what you see your child's strengths, interests, and passions are. And then the next part is, what is the student going to learn? Okay, we've looked at their present levels. So now that we've looked at the present levels, the IEP team is going to go in, they're going to pull out needs and say, okay, we're going to write a goal around this need. And so those present level drives it. The next step is to determine those goals. But in order to determine those goals, guys, we need to look and see what is that ultimate goal for this young person's good life, for their life after high school. And so we use this trajectory a lot, talking to families about, what is the vision you don't want? And this trajectory can be used as, what do I not want in this school year, on the school day, or in life in general? And then what are those things, the outcomes that you want in a good life? And so just quickly as an example, for us, starting with the negative is always easy. We don't want Sean, his seizures affecting his daily living. We don't want him segregated. He doesn't want to be segregated. And people say, well, how do you know this if he's nonverbal or he has limited verbal skills? We know this because we know the people around him. We know the environments where he's the happiest. And so we pull together as a team and we brainstorm. What are the things that he needs in his life to be successful, to be happy? And these are the things that his team came up with, and Sean can tell you some of these things. So that vision for a good life is, and so as for Sean, He started out in inclusive education. He was a part of the general education environment as much as possible. He was in the special ed some, but he was in the general education environment as well. Now, where that red arrow is going down, there were many times when we were pushed to have him placed in a segregated classroom for only students with autism. Had we done that, we would have been headed, in my personal strides, we would have been headed towards not the life he wanted, or it would have been harder to reach the life of being a part of my community if I'm not learning to be a part of my community as I'm growing. And so when we look at, and we'll talk about least restrictive environment, we want to make sure we're capturing all areas of that student's life. Like I said, Sean was in special education, but he was also in the general education setting at times. So we looked at those needs that were identified in that present level, and now the team is going to create annual goals. These are goals with a deadline of a year typically. And so we're going to identify that area of focus. What is the area of need? And then we're going to talk about that direction. Are we going to increase the reading level? Are we going to decrease the behavior? And then reflect reasonable expectations for that student for the year, and tied to the general education curriculum. I'm not really going to go into the goal components, and goals are written by the school. And so we think about it as parents, letting parents know what that goal, how to read a goal and how to understand the components of a goal. And so for Sarah, the behavior is that she's going to read. The condition is she needs second grade reading level. If we say a student is going to be able to greet his peers 3 times a day over the course of the IEP, then the student needs peers to be able to do that. And then the timeline is typically that school year. For some students, it may be Sean had regressive epileptic autism spectrum, so he would regress at certain times of the year. So we had to regroup and rewrite his IEP to meet the needs at that time. So you put those annual goals, all that stuff together, and you're going to get an annual goal that is observable and measurable. We're going to give Mary second grade reading material. Mary's going to be able to, at the end of this year, IEP year, read independently 80 words per minute with no more than 3 errors. We also need to know how this is going to be measured, who's going to be measuring it, so that when it comes time for progress reports, we're getting a report saying she's making progress towards this goal or not making progress. And then for students who take an alternate assessment, the idea requires that they have short-term objectives or benchmarks. Most districts in Kansas do have short-term objectives, so you have the goal and then they break it down by semester or quarter, saying what the student's going to gain during that time frame. It is not required for all students. So we got this: who is the student? What are they going to learn? And then now we're going to look at that, what will help them learn. So we've created that present level. We've identified the goals. Now, what will help that student learn? Now, when I said you pull out certain needs and write a goal, if there's a need mentioned in that IEP, the IEP team must address that need in some way in the IEP, whether it's through a goal, accommodation, support, modification, and we're going to talk some about that. So it's important that those needs are mentioned in the IEP, because we have families call and say, well, he's not getting his homework in and he's getting in trouble and he's failing, and are organizational skills a challenge, executive functioning? And many times the answer is yes, but it's not in the IEP, or the parents don't understand how they're addressing it in the IEP. And so we're able to help them understand that and formulate questions to work with the team. So what's going to help that student progress towards those goals and access the general education curriculum? What are some of those things? Accommodations. Accommodations don't change what's being taught. It's including a variety of techniques, strategies, and supports that student may need. Extra time, taking tests in a quiet place, having books read on tape. There are endless amounts. There's a lot, and a lot of our kids struggle with executive functioning. So some of these accommodations are invaluable to those youth. And on the Padlet, there are some examples of various accommodations. So modifications, you have accommodations and you have modifications. Modifications, the student is still accessing the same curriculum as their peers, but we are going to change some of the content or the expectation or how it's taught. So for example, when Sean was in 8th grade, they were studying Lewis and Clark. And Lewis and Clark is irrelevant to Sean. And studying that was not going to have an impact on his overall life. Now, I'm going to ask the question here. How many of you know what Lewis and Clark discovered? I will ask that question when I'm in doing presentations with educators, and rarely will somebody get the answer right. So my child has the same right to forget the curriculum that you did. But the other students are doing a character map with Lewis and Clark in the middle and all the things they discovered. They were botanists around the edge. The 8th grade teacher said the ultimate goal of this assignment is not to know about Lewis and Clark, but to learn what it is like to be an explorer and how to discover new things. So Sean's character map had him in the middle, and then the things that he was discovering. He was transitioning to the high school, so the high school. And so having those things that were real and relevant for Sean, he's doing the same assignment, ultimately learning the same thing as his peers. You know, what is it to be an explorer? All right. So other needs that we need to consider are the communication needs of the student. Do they need a communication device? How do they communicate effectively? Do they need sign language? We also need to look at English proficiency, assistive technology needs. And when we're talking about assistive technology, boy, these kids have a lot of great tools at their fingertips, but that also includes training on how to use that assistive technology for the teachers as well as parents if they're going to be using it at home. So making sure that we're not just handing assistive technology and saying you can use Speechify on this device if somebody doesn't know how to utilize the features of Speechify to speed up or slow down. And we also have to look at extended school year, and parent concerns have to be included. So for those students who have challenging behaviors that impede their learning or that of others, and when we say this, it's not necessarily those kids who are acting out, throwing things, stomping their feet, refusing to do work. These are also kids who are just staring out into space, who are not working and can't focus, getting up and walking around the room. The IEP team must do a functional behavioral assessment. It can be done at any time the behaviors impede that student's learning or that of their peers. Then develop positive behavior interventions and strategies and supports to address that behavior. Looking at that functional behavioral assessments, looking at everything that's happening in the environment before, after, during, and what that student is getting out of that behavior. And then coming up with strategies for teaching replacement behaviors, not punishing, but teaching socially appropriate replacement behaviors. So there's other services that some students may need: transportation, physical or occupational therapy. The list of therapies is endless, but these are the primary ones that we see kids in schools utilizing. And so if the child needs these services to benefit from their education, these services can be provided from 3 through 21. There is nothing saying that a student can't receive speech or OT in middle or high school. We hear it, but if it is a need and that need is impacting their access and progress to the general education curriculum, then the district must still provide that service. And for students who are transition age, one of the things I failed to mention when I talked about the IEP team, the most important member of that team is that student. That student should be at that meeting, at least in part, 5 minutes, whatever it is, or develop something they can share with the team, because that makes sure that the focus remains on the student. The student is understanding what people are doing, why they're doing it, and how they're teaching. Now, for JP, he was in his IEP meetings. He was leading his IEP meetings when he was in 2nd grade. But for Sean, he would go to his meetings, put his head down on the table, and they would say, Sean, what do you want to do? McDonald's. But he's in the room, he's hearing everything we're talking about. Sometimes those meetings can get intense. So if we have the youth come in and everybody share something positive that the youth did, our child did, and then they go out so that the adult conversation can continue. But for transition age students, youth who are 14 to 21, the IEP is going to shift and start looking at transition services to help the student reach their post-secondary goals in employment, education and training, and when appropriate, daily living skills. Each student who struggles with healthcare needs, and that impacts their access and progress in the general education curriculum, needs to have an individualized healthcare plan. It's going to be housed with the nurse. It can be attached to the IEP. These are students who take medications at school. These are students like Sean who have a seizure disorder. This plan is written with the help of the school nurse as well as documentation from the medical providers. But it gives people an idea of what this student's healthcare need is. And it also lines out a plan that Johnny takes meds on Tuesdays or every day at noon, but what happens if Johnny doesn't come up to get them? Who's going to go get him? Who's going to be the one to do this if the nurse isn't there? So the backup plan, so everybody knows when that child's medications are given and who they're given by. So then we're going to look at what's going to help the student, who's going to help the student learn. Our general education teachers are legally required to be a part of the IEP team. You have your special educators, your related service providers, parents, and then look outside of those IEP components. Look at people who are helping all other students, the peers, people in their community, people who volunteer. We also have to step back and look at what are the supports the school personnel may need. If this student's behavior plan says that they need somebody who's trained in CPI or a behavior technique, then that teacher needs to be in there in the IEP. For Sean's IEP, it said that the teachers would be trained, that those who work directly with Sean would be trained in his sensory needs, working with students who have limited verbal skills, and in the general education curriculum. And that sensory needs was the huge one. And so when the school does that training, when he was in preschool, they taught where we were using sign language. And because they were using sign language in school and I needed to use it at home, the school provided training for me on that. If I'm going to be doing that behavior strategy or whatever that is, I need to follow up at home, then the school can provide and it can be listed in the IEP parent training. And so we look at what support needs of the staff. We can write the perfect IEP, but if we don't address the needs of our educators and make sure they have the supports they need to make this happen, then the student is not going to be successful. So the last step in the IEP process is, where will that student learn? We've done the present level, we've written the goals, we've determined what supports and services that student needs and who's going to be a part of that team. And now we're going to look at what will the student learn. You're looking at what does the student need to learn skills required to achieve their goals. IDEA says that children with disabilities are to be educated to the maximum extent appropriate with students who are non-disabled, and that special classes, separate schools, or other removable of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occurs only when the structure or nature or severity of the disability is such that education in the regular classroom with the use of supplemental aids and services cannot be achieved. So we have to try these supplemental aids and services prior to putting the student in a more restrictive environment. The IEP has to include a statement saying how much the student is not participating in the general education environment. So LRE is determined every year. We rewrite that IEP, and at the end of that IEP, when we're writing it, we determine that placement every year. It's based on the IEP. It's as close to home as possible. It's not based on the fact that he has autism or he has a behavior disorder or behavior disability. It's based on the student's needs and where those needs can best be met using supplemental aids and services. So they have to have a continuum. Each district has to have a continuum of services. We always start with that thought of every student's going to be in that general education curriculum, in that classroom, general education classroom. And then for those students who that is not working, so we may be in a special education classroom part of the day and in a general education classroom another part of the day, pulled out for speech. Or the next step is, will they be in a special education classroom all day? And then there's the options of special schools, alternative schools, homebound instruction, or instructions in hospitals and institutions. The picture on the bottom left is Sean when he had pancreatitis, and the school was providing the therapies and things he needed there. The picture up on the right is JP in his general education classroom. So this is like a very quick review of the IEP process. And what it is, if you look at the terminology, we start with the present levels, who that student is. We create those measurable goals by identifying the needs in the IEP. We look at what supplemental aids and services are needed to address all the students' needs listed in the IEP. Then the IEP team comes together and determines who's going to do what, meet what goal combination support. And then we determine what the least restrictive environment is. And we review that annually.